Russia, I think it's disgusting what they're doing. I think it's disgusting. This is Biden's war. It's not my war. But I said if I get in, I'll try and get the thing stopped. But I think what Russia's doing is very sad. A lot of Russians are dying. You have a lot of Russians, more Russians are dying. But Russians are dying, Ukrainians are dying. You know, the United States isn't really involved in that war. It shouldn't be. And by the way, I made a deal with NATO where NATO pays us for everything that we send. We send them ammunition, missiles, etc. And we're not paying anything for that war. But I will tell you this, it should be stopped. It's a disgrace. And the ones that are dying are they're losing 7,000 now. It was 5,000. They're losing now 7,000 soldiers a week, Ukrainian soldiers and Russian soldiers. And they're also losing people now in the towns and cities because Putin's hitting them with rockets. No, I think it's disgraceful.
You have a 10-day deadline. You imposed a 10-day deadline.
Yeah, we have about 8 days. Yeah, we're going to put sanctions. I don't know that sanctions bother him. You know, they know about sanctions. I know better than anybody about sanctions and tariffs and everything else. I don't know if that has any effect, but we're going to do it. Europe is extremely upset. But this is a war that should have never happened. This is a war that wouldn't have happened if I were president. And this is Biden's war. This was a stupid war to get into. Should have never gotten into this war.
US President Donald Trump is going to hit Russia with sanctions and tariffs. Trump has already imposed a 25% tariff on India. Meanwhile, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin seriously miscalculated Trump. How does Trump plan to hit the Russian economy, and will new sanctions and tariffs force Putin to end his war against Ukraine? Republican Senator Lindsey Graham said that Putin has made a big mistake regarding Trump. Graham pointed out that Russia does not show a real desire for peace. Quote, Putin has miscalculated Trump. I hope countries like China, India and Brazil, which help support Putin's war efforts, will face consequences. Russia, you don't understand that Trump is changing the situation, and he will place tariffs on countries that buy your oil and gas, which supports your war. Additionally, US President Donald Trump warned former Russian dictator Dmitry Medvedev in response to his comments about the US government. Quote, Russia and the US do almost no business together. Let's keep it that way. Tell Medvedev, the former president of Russia, who thinks he is still in charge, to be careful with his words. He is entering dangerous territory. Medvedev has previously rejected Trump's warning to end the war in Ukraine or face serious economic tariffs. Also, yes, President Donald Trump will impose 25% tariffs on goods imported from India, plus an unspecified penalty for buying Russian oil and weapons. Trump stated that India's tariffs are among the highest in the world. He criticized India's purchase of military equipment from Russia and its energy imports. Quote, they have always bought a vast majority of their military equipment from Russia and are Russia's largest buyer of energy, along with China, at a time when everyone wants Russia to stop the killing in Ukraine. All things not good. On Monday, Trump also shortened the deadline for imposing sanctions on buyers of Russian exports to 10-12 days from the previous 50 days, unless Moscow agreed to a peace agreement in Ukraine. In response, India said that it is committed to reaching a fair and mutually beneficial trade agreement. Meanwhile, Indian state refiners have stopped buying Russian oil in the past week, according to Reuters. India's 4 largest oil refiners are now buying crude oil from spot markets, mainly sourcing from the Middle East and West Africa. They are moving away from Russian crude oil because discounts have decreased to lowest levels in 2022, when Western sanctions began. This drop in discount is due to fewer Russian exports and steady demand. Refiners also worried that EU restrictions could complicate international trade and fundraising efforts, even for buyers following the price cap. India continues to oppose sanctions. Also, currently, Russia supplies are about 35% of India's crude oil. In the first half of 2025, private buyers bought nearly 60% of India's average 1.8 million barrels per day of Russian oil, also which make up over 60% tariffs of India's total refining capacity. Also, it's interesting that Reliance has recently bought Abu Dhabi's Murban crude oil for loading in October, which is unusual for them, according to traders reported by Reuters. Additionally, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent warned Chinese officials that continued purchase of sanctions Russian oil would lead to high tariffs. Bessent expressed the U.S. dissatisfaction with China's ongoing purchase of sanctions Iranian oil and its sales of over $15 billion in dual-use technology to Russia, which have supported Moscow's war in Ukraine. He highlighted U.S. congressional law that authorizes President Trump to impose tariffs of up to 500% on countries that purchase sanctions Russian oil. In response, China stated that Beijing would protect its energy sovereignty. Currently, China remains the largest buyer of Russian oil, importing around 2 million barrels per day, followed by India and Turkey. Bessent also warned Chinese officials that continuing to sell goods to Russia that are used in weapons production could undermine China's efforts to strengthen trade ties with Europe. Quote, "I pointed out to them that it is very much hurting their public perception in Europe that they are contributing to the war on the European border." However, U.S. President Donald Trump remains uncertain whether new sanctions on Russia would force Vladimir Putin to end the war in Ukraine. He told reporters aboard Air Force One on July 29th, according to the New York Times. Quote, "I don't know it is going to affect Russia because Putin wants to continue his war, but we are going to put on tariffs and the various things you put on. It may or may not affect them, but it could." The New York Times reported that Trump has often threatened to punish Russia for escalating the war, but has not yet taken any actions regarding sanctions. According to the newspaper, experts believe Trump has enough leverage over Russia to force Putin to a negotiating table. Possible options include seizing parts of Russia's banking system, capping oil prices, and leveraging trade agreements with European allies. However, any secondary tariffs on countries buying Russian oil could also affect China, India, and Turkey, potentially worsening Trump's global trade war, according to the New York Times. Also, the U.S. Senate Appropriations Committee overwhelmingly approved the decision to support the Defense Appropriation Act bill for fiscal year 2026, which provides the allocation of $1 billion for military support for Ukraine. The Senate committee approved the decision by an overwhelming majority of votes, 26 for and against only 3. The bill provides for the allocation of funds for the continuation of military assistance to Ukraine, $800 million for the needs of the current USAI program, and more than $200 million for the needs of the Baltic Security Initiative program. Moreover, U.S. Senator Jeannie Shaheen and Senator Lisa Murkowski submitted for consideration another bipartisan bill supporting Ukraine Act of 2025, which provides for multi-billion-dollar assistance to Ukraine. This bill also contains a ban on any use of defense products purchased for Ukraine in a manner not provided for by Congress. Senators also proposed to establish guarantees for the exchange of U.S. intelligence information with Ukraine. The U.S. president is required to spend at least 15% of the International Security Cooperation Program funds on the operation of the U.S. European Command, according to the proposed bill. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump reacted to the UK's recognition of the state of Palestine. U.S. President Trump said Tuesday that he and the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer have not yet discussed this matter, surprisingly, and this plan to recognize Palestine. Two leaders met Monday in Scotland while Trump was visiting the country. Starmer announced that the UK will recognize a Palestinian state in September unless Israel agrees to a full ceasefire in Gaza.
Has just announced the UK will recognise Palestinian sovereignty in September if Israel does not commit to a ceasefire, ease the suffering in Gaza, and commit to a long-term solution that would deliver the two-state solution in the Middle East. Did you know that was coming?
No, we never discussed it, surprisingly. It was never really discussed.
maybe a little bit at the news conference, but he was sort of discussing it with you. We never did discuss it, and we have no view on that. We're going to get a lot of money to the area so they can get some food. He's going to also. I think the European Union is going to put up money too for food, and hopefully it's going to be properly distributed, and it will be.
That's all for today. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and glory to Ukraine.